right. Welcome everybody to our final coaching webinar of the 2025-2026 school year. We are joined today by the amazing Caty Carmendy. Yay! Jen and I were talking about how we're both fangirls earlier of Caty. She is absolutely amazing. You all are in for a wonderful, wonderful treat. Caty is coming to us from Mooresville High School as an instructional coach. She has traveled with us for many, many years with NC Bold. She is a presenter at NC Tides and many other conferences, and she is going to talk to us today about reinventing the PD experience. I have put the link into the chat. I will do that again, and I am going to mute at this point and turn things over to Caty.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining me on your Tuesday afternoon today. I know it's potentially some of your spring break, so thanks for spending some of your spring break with me. The link is never going to go away. It'll be on each one of my slides, and we have also got it in the chat, so feel free to access these resources at any time. I'm super excited about this session because this is one of my favorite anchor texts. I'm not going to spoiler alert it yet, but yeah, I'm excited to get started. So let's dig in. So today we're talking about adult learning and really how can we reinvent the PD experience? How can we make PD as effective as it possibly can be and really get our teachers using what we're wanting to teach them? So we're going to start by, I want you to think about the last PD session that you were in as a participant. Was it transformative or was it just required? And I want you to think about one word in the chat that you would use to describe this PD. So again, think about the last PD session that you attended where you were not leading it, you were a participant. Was it transformative or was it just required? What's the one word that you would use to describe this PD? And it doesn't have to be one of those words, but it can be. Well-paced. We've got a couple transformatives. So clearly, we as instructional coaches know the good ones to attend, right? Whether you've got a positive one word or a required. There are many of those that we all have to attend. Whether it was a positive one word or a negative one word, we're going to dig into exactly why you felt that way. Because when we do things with intention and we really try to do things that fit adult learning, not just pedagogy, there is plenty of ways that we can make our PD transformative. So I'm going to pose this question to you, especially if, some of the recent ones that you guys have mentioned that you went to, you're saying they were transformative or well-paced. I want you to especially think about one that you went to that didn't feel like that felt like it was just required, or you were checking out in that session, checking your email, anything of that nature. What if the problem wasn't the content itself, but how the session was designed? So this is when we're going to get into pedagogy versus andragogy, because they are not the same thing. In education, we often default to pedagogy because that's how we teach children. But today we're going to shift our focus and we're going to focus on andragogy, which if you haven't heard of that word before, it's how adults learn. So the next slide that I have for you guys really does a good job at kind of like bullet pointing the highlights of the difference between pedagogy and andragogy. So pedagogy is how we teach our kids. So think about, put your teacher hat on for a second. You're a teacher in a classroom full of kids. This is pedagogy. It's very teacher directed. Learners depend on the instructor. It's very content centered. There's focus on knowledge acquisition, a lot of external motivation like grades or rules. They often have limited prior experience and they're learning for future use. Andragogy, or the study of adult learning, is different. A lot of times it's learner directed or self-directed. It leverages prior experience because as adults, we bring more to the table than kids bring to the table sometimes when we're first teaching them something. It's problem-centered and real-world focus. It needs relevant. Adults need to understand, why does this matter? It's very intrinsically motivated instead of extrinsically motivated. Adults need to see immediate application, and adults value voice, choice, and collaboration. So pedagogy is typically teacher-directed, structured, and often very compliance-driven. It works well for kids, but it's not always effective for adults. Adults bring experience. They want autonomy. They need relevance. They don't just want to receive learning. They want to engage with it. So I want you to specifically look at the andragogy column that I have for you right now. And I want you to tell me in the chat, or think about it for the next minute or two, which one of those indicators stands out to you the most and why? Which one of those andragogy indicators or adult learning indicator stands out to you? Maybe it resonates with you because you've done a PD before, you've led an effective PD, and you feel like the reason why your PD was successful was because of one of these things. Or you're thinking about a PD right now where this thing was missing, but if this thing was there, it could have strengthened what you were going through. So we've got relevance, immediate application. If we put our teacher hats back on, especially because we were all teachers at one point, the PD that we left often saying, oh my gosh, this was the best PD ever, is something that we could take and use immediately. So that's obviously something very important that we want to keep in mind when we're designing PD. So when we design adult PD, we design adult PD like we're teaching kids. And here's the tension. Too often, professional development for adults is designed using pedagogical methods, which creates disengagement almost immediately. Because oftentimes when we teach like we're teaching kids, one of those things is missing. It's either not relevant, and that's what makes it feel like it's required. Things of that nature. So our anchor text today is one of my favorites. It's the PD book by Elena Aguilar. PD, she truly believes that PD should be transformational, not transactional. And this is really where her book becomes such an important anchor for our work, because she really pushes us to rethink PD, not as information delivery, but as transformational learning. When I say the word transformational learning, think about what that means. Transformation means that something is happening. So when we're designing transformational learning, the goal that I always try to keep in mind is I want to enact change with teachers. If I leave a PD or I'm a designing PD and I feel like change is not going to be made by teachers when they leave me, that's transactional, not transformational. And so this book really focuses on transforming us from sit and get to meaningful experiences. She challenges us to move away from those sit and gets and towards experiences that are human-centered, reflective, and collaborative. Those are often the most transformational PDs that we attend. So what's our purpose and what standards do I align to today? Today, our purpose is we're going to explore pedagogy versus andragogy. We kind of already did that, but you're going to hear me continue to hit on those andragogy indicators as we go throughout our presentation today. We're going to rethink PD design, and we're going to create engaging adult learning experiences. In terms of the ISTE coaching standards, I feel like we're living in that 4A, 4B, and 4C strands. So 4A is collaborative learning, designing PD that centers active adult learning, which is actually a very specific indicator that we're going to get into here in a minute. Professional learning designer, obviously, it has PD in the title of this webinar session. We're trying to create sustained, relevant learning experiences. And then learning facilitator, we want to facilitate engaging, participant-centered PD. Okay, so this book by Elena Aguilar actually has 7 transformational habits. So we're going to hit these one at a time. And as we hit these one at a time, I'm going to offer up a strategy, and we're going to also talk about why these 7 transformational habits are deeply rooted in this idea of andragogy. So the first one is building community. Aguilar emphasizes that learning is social. Adults need to feel safe and feel connected. So one idea is that you start PD with a quick connection prompt. What's one success that you've had this week is an example of that. But there's lots more, there's lots more strategies that we use to help adults feel connected to one another. This matters though, because andragogy tells us adults won't engage deeply unless there's trust and belonging. So a strategy is to open with connection before content. Before you jump into the content that you're trying to teach them, how can you create connection first? And then again, hitting on this idea of andragogy, adults learn better when they're in safe environments. So how, even when you only have an audience for 50 or 45 minutes, how can you help create that safe environment for them? So as we go through these 7 indicators, if you click on the microphone in the top left-hand corner of my presentation, if you're on the slides, the microphone is going to take you to a space where we can collaborate with each other. So this space is in the form of a Padlet. It's in columns in the form of a shelf so that we can look at one specific transformational habit at a time. So this first one is building community. I already offered up a couple of strategies like open with connection before content, or starting your session or your PD with a question like, what's one success that you've had this week? So I want you to think about how you create experiences with your adult learners in PD that you're designing. And I want you to add that to the Padlet. I'm going to give you a minute. The couple that I have already posed to you, I'm going to add to the Padlet as well. So we're in the first column, building community. Think about what are some ways that you build community and have had success with this when you're designing PD. The second one that I'm adding to the Padlet right now is called Name and Motion. So name and motion is where you have everyone think of a motion that represents them. There's actual research that shows that an actual visual representation helps you remember things better. And so you'll often find that if you play this game with adults, especially, that you remember their motion before you remember their name. So if I modeled the game for you, I would say, hi, my name is Caty Carmendy, and I like to race remote control cars. And so you would have to remember that my motion is this. This is the motion for racing remote control cars. If I were to continue to go around in a circle to everyone who is on this webinar before I pass it off to Jen next, before she said her name in motion, she would have to say my name in motion first. So Jen would say, hey, this is Caty. She likes to race RC cars. And hi, I'm Jen, and I like to. I recently read Student-Centered Coaching. I recently read a book. Sorry, Jen, I'm stealing your thunder there. And then you keep going around in the circle, but you always have to say the name and the motion of the people that came before you. And if you start with that strategy, you'll find that it's much easier to remember people's motions than their name. But the point is that later on in the PD, maybe conversation comes up and somebody else likes racing too. They remember that my motion was this, and we have a moment to make a connection with each other. So I'm going to add that to the Padlet really quickly before I move on. Great. There's some other ideas on the Padlet as well. So feel free to add to this Padlet at any time as we go through the 7 transformational habits. Always the same idea. Whether I'm talking or starting to introduce an idea, you're welcome to go to the Padlet and add ideas that make sense or that you've already used in PD that you've designed. All right, let's go to the second one. So the second one is make learning active. I talked about this in one of my opening slides. So the transformational move is making learning active, but how that connects to andragogy is adults learn through active engagement, reflection, and interactive. Making learning active isn't just about talking, it's about engaging the brain and the body. As I mentioned with the name and motion strategy, it's designed that way for a reason. It's designed that way because there's neurons in your brain that are activated when you're looking at the motions and trying to actually emulate the motions versus just having a conversation with somebody. So one powerful structure that I like to use in PD is called think, write, move. So they say that you should allow someone to process information if you think about a textbook that you're reading after every single paragraph. Now, do we always have time in professional development to stop after every single paragraph or every single slide? Maybe not, but I always like to shoot for every 5 to 7 minutes, especially if we're working with adults, trying not to go over that 5 to 7 minute phrase. And this is just a really easy one to make the learning active. So you give everyone a minute to think about the information that was just presented, and you give them a minute to write down everything they remember. So if I've posed this question to you so far, I would pose the question and ask you to write down everything that you remember about pedagogy versus andragogy. And I would give you a minute to write. And then after I gave you a minute to write, I would give you a minute to move. And so during the move time is a time where you're trying to go find new information. So you leave your paper at your seat and you go read other papers and you keep reading until you find new information. Once you find new information, then you go back and add it to the information that you've already written down. And you repeat this process as many times as you can in a minute. So it only takes up to 2 minutes to facilitate, but it's a really good way to stop and process information, but to also make it active. All right, so making the learning active. I'm maybe going to hit 2 before I go back to the Padlet, but if you've already got ideas jogging in your head about how could you make learning active, or how have you already done that successfully in a PD that you've designed, go ahead and feel free and add that to the Padlet now. All right, the third transformational move, which someone actually said in the chat, is ensuring relevance. So ensuring relevance is our transformational move. But how this connects to andragogy is adults are motivated by immediate usefulness. At least one of you has already addressed this in the chat as well. So an idea is to start with a real problem of practice. So a real problem of practice could be as simple as starting your PD with what's your biggest challenge with blank. So say you're doing a PD on AI. What's your biggest challenge with AI? And so starting with a real problem of practice helps you connect your content to their responses. Adults need to see, why does this matter to me right now? And that's what helps create motivation and them being able to see that something is immediately useful. So I'm going to pause there. We've had 2 new transformational habits: make learning active and ensure relevance. And I'm going to make sure that I add my ideas for both as well. So take a minute if you have an idea for one of those 2 transformational practices and share your ideas with everyone. And make sure to always come back to this Padlet, because there are friends who are going to watch the recording. And potentially new ideas will keep getting added. Sorting challenge. I love that one, Lauren. Move. Share. For a minute. All right, we've got some ideas in all of those columns. So thank you everybody for collaborating. Feel free to keep going. All right, good news. We have 4 transformational practices left, and then we're still going to get into some more after that. I've got a lot to show you here. Jam-packed session. We've got 40 minutes left, but 4 practices to go. So let's go to the next one. The next one is differentiate learning, which I really feel like this one has to do with a lot of providing choice. So I kind of call it both. Differentiate learning, that's easy to do if you give adult learners choice. And the reason why choice comes to mind when I'm talking about this transformational habit is because in terms of andragogy, adults need autonomy and control. Adults are self-directed, and choice increases engagement and ownership of their learning. So this is a really powerful tool that you can embed into your PD. So the strategy is to offer choice. Maybe there's different pathways or different tasks or different focus areas, or maybe there's different challenges based on different content areas. I think another easy way to do this is not to necessarily change your content, but to change whether there's like a beginner, intermediate, or advanced task based on what you're trying to get them to do. So beginners go and do this task related, say we're talking about AI again. Beginners go and do this task related to AI. Intermediate goes and does this task related to AI, and advanced goes to this task related to AI. So beginner, intermediate, and advanced is a really easy way to provide choice or differentiate the learning in your PD sessions as well. So I'm going to do the 5th transformational habit as well, but feel free if you have ideas about how you differentiate learning already or provide choice within the PD that you're designing, feel free to add that to the Padlet. All right, number 5. is to use reflection. So reflection is a very powerful tool for adult learners. That's how adults make meaning. So reflection is where learning becomes internalized for adults. So the strategy is to build in structured reflection prompts. An easy one is my next step. So an example of my next step would be at the end of your PD, have participants get on a sticky note and say what their next step is going to be based on what you just taught them. Very easy, takes just a minute. 3, 2, 1, we're all used to using that protocol, but there's a lot of different ways that you can pose or create 3, 2, 1 type questions to center them around reflection. And then some even more ideas of questions that you could ask are, what will you try next? Or what challenged your thinking today? Any of those kind of questions are getting them to think and reflect about what they just learned today. So I'm going to pause because I gave you 2 new doing a great job adding those to the Padlet. But I'm going to add and share the ideas that I posed to you guys here today as well. What will you try next? What challenged your thinking? Using reflection prompts. Using my next step is based on today's. All right, and then differentiate learning or provide choice. I love the playlist option that Lauren shared in that Padlet. That's a great one. We even got a good visual there for you. Oh, choose your own adventure. That's a great one. Provide time for teachers to work on something based on their content. Apply what you're teaching, demonstrating, and then time for work collaboration. That's a great example. Okay, love these ideas, guys. Good job. All right, our last 2. So feel free to keep adding to that Padlet, but our last 2 transformational habits, and then we'll get to some more goodies. So I don't even know what number am I on. What number am I on? 6 is to balance content, process, and conditions. So the transformational move is that we don't want to just design slides or design content and focus on content that we're trying to deliver to adults. If we focus on content alone, we're going to miss the transformational opportunity. And especially if content is all we focus on, that's when it becomes transactional rather than transformational. So to make it transformational, we have to balance all 3 of these things, not just content alone, but also the process in the conditions. And how that connects to andragogy is the environment that we're in impacts adult learning. So good questions to ask yourself are, what are they learning? That's content. How are they engaging? That's your process. And do they feel safe? That's your conditions. Just like kids, if they don't feel safe, they're not going to engage and contribute in a meaningful way. So what are they learning? Content. How are they engaging? Process. And do they feel safe? That's the conditions that they're working under. Adults won't learn if the environment doesn't support it. And an optional strategy, sorry, before we go on to the next one, is to make sure that you're intentionally planning for all 3. Don't just design these beautiful slides and call it a day. Really ask yourself, and I actually have a planning template here that I'm going to share with you after this 7th transformational move that I'm going to hit. I have a planning template that I'm going to share with you that you can really use and think about, do I have balance between content, process, and conditions? And then our last one, our seventh one, is to plan for application. So ending with a concrete implementation plan helps adults immediately transfer to practice. So we already talked about relevance and why relevance is important in adults needing to feel like it's impactful to them to be able to turn around and use it. But if they can't use it tomorrow, the information's not going to stick. So you need to end with a concrete implementation plan and really keep in mind how adults can immediately transfer this information into their practice. So in a way that this strategy could look like, or a question to pose would be closing your PD with something like, what will you implement this week? Or have participants write or share a next step. So we've hit our 7 transformational habits, and we're going to go to that Padlet one more time for the last 2 that we talked about. Balance content, process, and conditions, and plan for application. Do you have some strategies that you already use with adult learners that helps them? Oh, the art of gathering. Yes, that was a good anchor text in one of our previous book studies. That's a great one. Thank you for adding that, Lauren. What are some ways that you're already doing to balance content, process, and conditions? Or what are some strategies that you use with adult learners to plan for application? And I'll make sure I share some of those ideas that I said as well. My next step is really still a great one for planning for application. What will you implement this week? All right, and then while we're on the Padlet, I have a couple of extra goodie resources for you here on the Padlet. I don't have it on my slideshow because it's much too long to put on a slide. I would have had to link it separately anyways. So the Padlet seems like a good place to put this resource since we're already going to the Padlet for all of these ideas. But I have a planning template for you guys. So all of the principles that we talked about today, all of the 7 transformational habits, I've got for you here. You can copy and paste them into a Google Doc, but it really goes over what the transformational habit is, your goal, how to plan for it. It even gives an example and talks to you about what the andragogy connection is. So if you use this planner when you're planning PD, it's a good checklist to say, hey, do I've got these things that are going to make this PD feel like it's transformational and not just a sit and get or transactional experience. So these 7 moves are not just strategies, they're a mindset shift. When we align PD with how adults actually learn, that's how change and we get change to happen. This is why I love having the PD book as our anchor text. So we're going to get into some specific examples that I feel like I have already done or designed in PD that I have led and created that aren't just your typical professional development learning experience. But before I show you some examples of how you could potentially think outside of the box when you're doing PD, I want to share one more resource, and I have to actually say, like, kudos to Lauren and Jen because they brought this resource like back fresh in the front of my memory, and I was like, yes, this makes so much sense. So if you've never seen this before, this is I hope I'm saying their names right, Lippitt Noster model for managing complex change. But how you use this chart or how you read this chart is you have to have, look at the top row, you have to have all of these things for change to actually happen and you to see success. So you have to have a clear vision, you have to have a clear consensus, you have to have skills, you have to have incentives, you have to have resources, and you have to have an action plan. If you have all of those things, then you're going to find success with whatever you're trying to deliver PD on or create change in your schools. So for example, a focus of my school right now is definitely active learning and how to increase student to student discourse. If I don't clearly communicate that vision and the why behind why we're focusing on student to student discourse, then that's going to cause confusion amongst the teachers who I'm trying to deliver this information to. So that's why I love this chart, because that example that I gave you is the second row. So when vision is missing, when vision is removed from the equation, that is what it creates amongst the teachers who you're trying to deliver this information to. So when you don't communicate consensus, I think of consensus as like the why as well. Why are we doing what we're doing? Why did we come to this consensus? How was it decided? That creates sabotage. And so I think it's really interesting to go row by row and see kind of like what emotion it can create or what experience it can cause for the teachers who you're trying to teach if one of these things is missing. And so if you click on this image, of course, the pop-up is blocked on my window. What do I have blocking this website? Okay, well, as long as you don't have pop-up blockers on your screen, it's going to actually open you to, yeah, let's always allow that. It's going to open you to another website. Sorry about that, guys, where it's going to take you a little bit more in depth, because I don't have time to go into this model too deeply, but it's going to take you to a great resource that does go a little bit more deeper and helps you understand row by row, if one of these things is missing, what does it cause? So this is a great, really short article that's easy to read if you want to dive into those ideas a little bit deeper. So here's where we're thinking about all of these things that we just talked about. We set the stage and we talked about the 7 transformational habits of PD and how that connects to andragogy or adult learning. And then also this model of change, where if one of these things is missing, it can cause some of these ideas that prevent andragogy or adult learning from being successful and from being transformational. So here are some outside of the box examples of how you can do professional development with your staff. And all of these ideas are not your typical, like, hey, your staff is in front of you and you're going to do a presentation for them and you're going to make sure they process information in front of you live. All of these ideas are a little bit more different outside of the box. And so when you see an idea, I want you to think about or type in the chat, what transformational habit can you really see in one of these ideas that I'm presenting on? So this first one is called class visits. If you've been to some of my presentations before, you may have seen me present on this idea. But class visits is a completely asynchronous professional development that I designed for my teachers. And it stemmed from a problem of not being able to take my teachers to see other teachers teaching, and or when I did, we weren't always seeing what I was trying to showcase, or we were having to stay a long time in the classroom. So say I was taking a beginning teacher to see a really great classroom management class. Sometimes we were having to stay in there like 45, 50, 55, 60 minutes to really understand the classroom management systems. Well, this idea of class visits and flipping it and making it asynchronous made all of that work a little bit quicker. So whatever it is that I'm trying to showcase about a teacher, you're welcome to actually click on these. This is an example of one where I was showcasing things like instructional strategies that really supported active learning. So you can see the first one was K&L with Miss Martin. And so how this PD is set up is it's set up, I'm actually going to click on, no, maybe I will click on one of these examples if it'll load. Yes, let's click on spoon review game with Miss Oliver. So all of these are clickable if you do have this link open. And so this is what the idea of class is. So if a teacher were to do this professional development async completed by, and they pick one of these to explore. So right then and there, there's already a lot of choice because they can pick which one resonates with them the most. So this one is called Spoon's Review Game. And so I open up with this as questions so they can really dig in and figure out, is this information relevant to them? So the essential particular class visits are how can I engage my students in the learning, and what are some ways I can review content with students? If that's something I'm actively trying to improve, then that resonates with me, and I'm going to choose to go ahead and finish this class visit. If it doesn't, I can close out of it and click on a new class visit and try to find one that's more relevant to me. But the second section is where they always watch a short clip. It's like 5 to 10 minutes of a teacher teaching. Oftentimes when you watch these videos, you'll see that it's very focused in what the students are doing. But it's just long enough that you get an idea of what the students are doing, how the students are engaging, but not so long that you're completely disengaging from the content area. If there's any outside resources to explore, teachers using a digital resource, or they had a worksheet, or there was a specific strategy that they were using, I always link the resources for them to explore more. And then there's a way for them to reflect and share. They reflect independently, and this reflection is what they share with me to get credit for PD. And then I always have them share out with each other so that they can see what each other are learning about and what each other are finding success with. And then the last thing that I have them do is I always kind of try to open the door for a coaching cycle. And so I tell them to reflect with a purpose. And if they want to try to actually implement this in their classroom, use me for a coaching cycle. Book some time with me and let's get a coaching cycle started, and let's actually do this with your students. So even though honestly, I could go a whole 60 minutes under the I don't have time to do that. You kind of get the idea of how a class visit is working and why it maybe falls into one of those 7 transformational habits and really has the potential to be a transformative PD experience. And then I do have the templates here for you guys if you like that idea of class visits. There's a blank one here that you can copy. But I want you in the chat to think about, when you heard this idea presented, what are some of the 7 transformational habits that you saw present in that idea? This idea of class visits. In the chat, what are some of the transformational habits? So just looking at the list, you can see that adults had choice. So there was differentiated learning. There was definitely relevance. That was the purpose of the essential questions, to figure out, is this something timely for me or not? Yes, relevance. That's definitely one that comes to mind. All right, so let's keep going and let's hit a couple more examples because we have time for a couple more examples. So this second one is called March Madness. And so this one too had a lot of choice. And if you click on either of these boards, it should open the March Madness Challenge for you guys. And you guys should be able to look at it and understand it a little bit deeper. So this was a professional development challenge that I challenged just to try something new. So they had been doing and getting a lot of PD for me. We studied, Lauren, I know you know that playbook and you use it a lot. But we had learned about all these strategies, and the purpose of me releasing this March Madness Challenge was to make sure they were actually using these strategies in practice. And so during the month of March, I challenged them to pick 4 of these strategies and really think about and reflect, was it successful? How did your students engage with the content, et cetera, et cetera? So you can see I have essential questions of how this challenge will benefit a teacher's instruction. So I'm trying to address right off the bat, how is it relevant to them? It was also aligned to our school's PDP goal alignment. So if we go back to that, I'm going to go back to the infographic right here. If we go back to this, yes, this Notster model for managing complex change. There was clear vision there because that was our school's PDP goal, that we were going to do this and focus on this. And there was clear consensus on the why. Why were we choosing to do this at this particular time? Why were we trying to focus on this? The March Madness provided a clear action plan for teachers. There was obviously resources linked on those slides. And then incentives, if I go back to that March Madness challenge, there were additional incentives for teachers. So where did it say it? Maybe it was on the opening slide. Okay, so the incentives were, there were individual winners who were drawn randomly for prizes like chart paper, smelling markers, or a PD book of their choice. And then the department who had the most % participation received a pizza lunch party in April. So there were various different incentives to entice them to try these strategies and to use these strategies in their classrooms. So again, think about that scenario and think about how can something like that really hit the 7 transformational practices and make something that's transformational or actually changing instruction in teachers' classroom based on what they're doing. Another very easy idea or very small shift, instead of an idea that's like a full-blown different way of thinking of professional development, is changing or tweaking your newsletter. So the example that I love to change or tweak your newsletter is we create newsletters because we're trying to share information with teachers. We often learn about new cool things that we don't always have time to do a full-blown PD session on, or there's things that we actually need to remind them of as it pertains to instruction. So the small tweak that you can make to your newsletter is to provide choice. Remember, choice, especially as that connects to andragogy, creates ownership. So this particular example that I gave, if you click on it, it should open up a s'more for you that you could see the s'more. Yes, I actually want to be redirected there. And so it did a great job at showing how you can provide choice in your newsletter with this read, watch, and listen section. So the section in general was centered around AI, but there was 3 different ways that my teachers could engage with this part of my newsletter. They could either read an article that addresses what's up with AI. They could watch a YouTube video about, I think that was a video that Matt Miller released, or they could listen to more of an audio podcast style podcast that released the same kind of information. So I had 3 different ways that they could get information about what's up with AI. So that small tweak in your newsletter can actually provide some ownership and get them to engage with your newsletters. Because how often do you create a newsletter and then you're not even really sure if anyone's using that information? And speaking of how you can get people to use that information, this last idea that I have to share with you guys was actually a brainchild of the Tech Trek Collective. So I have to give Lauren and Jen a kudos one more time because they ran that Tech Trek Collective for the state. And the whole point of the Tech Trek Collective was to think about how could you, what's one thing that you want to change, and how could you create a transformational experience to create change in your school buildings. And so that's when this March Madness bingo board was born. So it's kind of like a 2.0 of the previous example that I showed you. But if you click on it, you can actually see probably a little bit better the things that were on my bingo board. And if we think about that change model, you can obviously, by the second image, see that there are a lot of incentives. We've got a lot of March Madness PD prizes going on, but all of these things were pretty much, for the most part, completely optional. Teachers could choose to participate in them. But we tried to make it clear if there was a basketball on something, that particular activity could count towards a CEU. And then the number is how many times they could submit that activity to get a prize ticket or to get a CEU. And so if you click on this link to the Google form, you'll see that it's just one giant Google form, and they keep submitting the Google form as many times as they want to. They complete as many activities as they want to during the month of March to try to get them to use either things that we've taught them already or actually put something into practice. And so what is crazy is, I'm going to skip to the second slide. So every time they submit the form, I have a pivot table on the back end that's kind of looking for their name and counting how many times their name has submitted. I also have a formula that's calculating for each different school at our secondary level how many teachers are in that school and how many unique names it's actually finding in the submissions of the Google form. And so that's actually what the next slide is in this presentation. It's some data behind the participation that I got with this challenge. And so what's crazy is we had 4 different schools participating in this challenge, which was a completely optional challenge. They did not have to participate in this. And one school, which was my school, was at 79% participation, which is crazy because I have like 125 teachers, and I got almost 80% of them submitting at least one thing to me. And for my school specifically, we had 261 unique submissions of teachers submitting something, which is crazy. This is crazy data. One of our other middle schools was at 85%. They were actually the school that won. So we always kind of kept this scoreboard visual. And the reason why I kept these other 2 schools on here is I almost took this data out, but I was like, no, this data is actually very validating for our position here as instructional coaches, or whatever your position is related to coaching. Is these 2 schools that were at 62% and 39%, they don't have a coach assigned to them. So I am assigned to just one school, this school that's in blue right here. And I have another person who's working at one of our middle schools who is assigned to just this school in red. These two schools at 62% and 39% participation have no instructional coach assigned to them and have a vacancy right now. So it also speaks to the level of our job. When you have an instructional coach involved, you're seeing more change in instruction. And that data was actually so validating to our position that I was like, oh, we're just going to leave those schools on there. They also are much smaller schools. The high school in our school district is the biggest school. So that's also part of why those numbers are so large compared to some of the other schools. But that data is pretty eye-opening on an optional professional development challenge. The coaches got like 80% or more of their school to participate in an optional challenge. And I truly feel like it's because we followed these 7 transformational habits and used that model of change to make sure we were designing something that was relevant and immediately usable for them. So I'd like to point out a couple of examples that are on that bingo board. You can see all of the DPI micro credentials. We use the high school micro credentials for educators for AI literacy. And we weren't sure how to roll this out this school year because we already had things planned, but we knew we wanted teachers already using these micro credentials and getting familiar with what these skills were. So we put them on this optional PD choice board, and we were enticing people to learn about these AI literacy skills and then try to demonstrate mastery by showing us how they were using them in the classroom already. And then another one that I love on here is in the third row, the second one in, you can see it's called Newsletter Strategy and Practice. So they had to go back to one of my previous newsletters and tell me, how am I actually using one of these strategies that you shared in my practice? So this was a super successful PD challenge. It was just basically like collecting points. Whoever got the most points got the most chances for all of these prizes. And so how we ran our Google form is every time they submitted one challenge, at the end of the Google form, they pick which prize they want their name to be entered in under, so they could submit their names multiple times for a prize. And we just filtered the sheet and took all the names that showed up for one particular prize, put them in a random wheel of names spinner, and then spun for who won that particular prize. So it was like a virtual way to collect tickets and try to entice our staff to participate and to use some of these strategies that we were wanting them to use and wanting them to do with them. So hopefully you've got some ideas that you can use or some ways that you can think about these 7 transformational habits and really transform the PD that you're trying to design for your adult learners. I thought the next webinar was May 5th, but Jen or Lauren might correct me. This might be the last one, and you might not see us again until August. But I really appreciate you guys joining me today. Hopefully you've got a lot of goodies that you can take away from this session. That was definitely the goal. I'd appreciate it if you filled out the feedback form for today's webinar. And I hope you all have a lovely rest of your evening.
Yay! Thank you so much. As usual, I have many, many notes from the session. Please do fill out the feedback survey so that we can know how we can best support you. And yes, that's the information I have too. Our next webinar will be May 5th. Kendra will be hosting that one. Kendra works for NCAT, and she is an important part of our coaching community. Her session is called Coaching by Design, Creative Low-Lift Ways to Inspire Growth. So I'm very much looking forward to that, and you'll be able to register for that through Eventbrite. We appreciate you spending time with us. And Caty, thank you so, so much for putting this together. And I'm still a fan.